The twin suns burned high over the Queen's capital, casting long shadows over the grand arena. The air was heavy with heat, and the sound of thousands of alien voices echoed from the stone walls. Every seat was full, every eye fixed on the wide arena floor where the day's most awaited challenge was about to begin. In the royal balcony, the Queen sat on her high throne, her golden crown gleaming in the sunlight. Her expression was one of pride and confidence, because today she planned to humiliate the one creature who dared to speak against her ruler. Human. This was not just a fight, it was a show of dominance. A lesson to all who might think of defying her. She had chosen her fiercest warrior for the task, tall as a tower, with scaled armor fused into her skin. The alien woman was a living legend in the capital. Her name was Vera, and her victories were countless. Many challengers had faced her in the past, and every single one had been broken physically and in spirit. But today, the opponent was not a warrior from her own kind. Not even from a respected alien race. It was a man from the far-off human colonies. A man named Daniel. Daniel stood alone at the center of the arena floor. He wore simple leather armor, nothing fancy. No glowing weapons or shields. His face was calm, his eyes steady. The crowd roared with laughter at the sight of him, small compared to Vera. His skin pale under the burning suns. They shouted insults, waved flags of the Queen's crest, and called for Vera to crush him quickly. The Queen raised her hand for silence. Her voice rang out clear. "Daniel of Earth," she announced, "you stand accused of insulting my crown and my people. By our law, you must face the judgment of the arena." She gestured to Vera, who stepped forward with a slow, confident stride. Her spear was as tall as 2 men, its blade sharp enough to cut through steel. "You will fight her with this," the Queen said, and one of her guards tossed a short, blunt staff at Daniel's feet. The crowd howled in laughter. It was an insult giving him a weapon that could barely harm a training dummy. Daniel bent down, picked it up, and twirled it once in his hand as if testing its weight. His calm smile didn't fade, and for a brief moment, some in the crowd fell silent, unsure why he wasn't trembling like the others before him. The arena bell rang. Vera moved first, her spear sweeping forward like a flash of silver. Daniel sidestepped, the spear missing him by inches, the tip striking the sand with a sharp crack. The crowd gasped, because most challengers didn't last more than a single blow. Vera's yellow eyes narrowed, and she attacked again, faster, stronger. Each strike was precise, meant to corner him. Daniel's feet moved lightly on the sand, dodging each attack. The blunt staff in his hands, like an extension of his body, from the royal balcony. The Queen leaned forward, her confident smile now mixed with curiosity. She had expected him to panic, to stumble and fall under Vera's power. Instead, the human moved like water, flowing around each strike, his breathing steady. Vera growled, frustrated. Her strikes grew wilder, heavier, each one shaking the ground. Daniel ducked under one blow, spun, and tapped her side with the blunt end of his staff, not enough to harm, but enough to show he could have landed a P to poo. A P of landed a P. A landed a P. A, long last aid. Long last aid. H10, loss, last aid. A minot, epti. AC, CC, AC. ECC. This HF, K, KC. I may see comet to be raid C a cred IKCs, where on lie do we so sarikakadid. Ka we seely cry it, guess it to be kraken 6 I seek I kyle I sakata I katats I kaya but his real hit. The crowd reacted with surprise, some cheering, others booing. Vera's pride burned. and she launched into a furious assault. Daniel's eyes never left hers, his focus unbroken. It was as if he had studied her every move before stepping into the arena. Then, in a moment so fast many missed it, he slid to her blind side, brought the staff up, and knocked the spear from her hands. It clattered across the sand, and the arena went silent. Vera froze, her chest rising and falling with deep breaths. Daniel stepped back, holding his weapon loosely, making no move to attack further. The silence stretched. The crowd, not sure what they were witnessing, in the Queen's eyes. The humiliation had already begun, but not for Daniel. For the first time in years, her champion had been disarmed by someone half her size. And worse, he had done it without fear, without cruelty, and without even using a real weapon. This fight was far from over. But one thing was already clear: Daniel was no ordinary human. And the Queen's plan to humiliate him might have just taken its first step toward disaster. The heavy silence in the grand arena lasted only a breath before the crowd erupted again. Some shouted for Vera to finish the fight. Others called the human's disarming move a lucky trick. High above, the Queen's smile was tight, her fingers gripping the arm of her throne. She would not allow this human to make her champion look weak. Vera bent down, picked up her spear, and gave Daniel a glare that could have cut steel. Her pride had been wounded, and now her attacks would be relentless. Daniel only shifted his stance, his weight-balanced eyes locked on her. The blunt staff spun slowly in his hand, a motion almost casual. But it made Vera hesitate for a heartbeat. Then she lunged. The spear's tip came like a lightning strike toward his chest. Daniel stepped sideways, sand kicking up under his boots. He didn't just dodge, he tapped the shaft of the spear with his staff, guiding it off course. The move was so smooth it looked like water flowing around stone. Vera growled, pulling back and striking again, this time with more speed. She used both ends of the spear, thrusting, sweeping, spinning it in arcs so wide the air hummed. Each blow carried the strength to break bone. Daniel moved with precision, weaving through the strikes, his staff rising and falling in small, controlled motions to deflect just enough force to keep him safe. The crowd began to notice something strange. Daniel was not trying to overpower Vera. He was making her miss, making her waste energy. Every missed strike made her movements heavier, her breath louder. It was a different kind of fight. Then they were used too. This wasn't brute force against brute force. It was speed and control against raw power from the balcony. The Queen's advisor leaned toward her and whispered, "This is no ordinary fighter, my Queen." The Queen's eyes narrowed. She had heard rumors that humans fought differently, relying on cunning instead of muscle, but seeing it with her own eyes made her uneasy. Vera, frustrated, tried a new tactic. She feinted to the right, then twisted low. Sweeping Daniel's legs with the butt of her spear, the sand shifted under him, but he leaped back just in time, his staff planting into the ground for balance. In one motion, he swung it upward, striking the flat of the spear and knocking it aside again. The sound of the clash echoed. Vera's arms shook slightly from the impact. She attacked harder, her body a blur of motion, each swing faster than the last. Daniel's breath stayed calm, his eyes sharp, his movements almost like a dance. Every time her spear came close, his staff met it at just the right point to deflect. Without wasting strength, then, the moment came. Vera thrust straight for his chest. Putting all her weight behind the attack, Daniel sidestepped and, with a swift twist of his staff, hooked it under the spear. Using her own momentum, he wrenched it from her grip and sent it spinning across the sand once more. The arena went silent again. For the second time, Vera stood weaponless before the human. This time, Daniel didn't back away. He stepped closer, his staff's tip resting just lightly against her collarbone, not to hurt, but to show her that he could end the fight if he wished. Vera's breathing was heavy, her chest rising and falling. She stared into his eyes, seeing no mockery there, only steady focus. It made her anger twist into something else, a grudging respect she didn't want to admit. The crowd didn't know what to think. Half of them roared in disbelief. The other half cheered for the unexpected underdog. The queen leaned forward, her voice cold. "Continue," she ordered. The arena bell rang again. Vera took a step back, reclaiming her stance without her spear, her fists curling. Daniel nodded once, as if accepting a challenge only he understood. The fight was far from finished, but now the real battle was beginning. Speed and skill against the raw, unarmed fury of a champion who had never lost twice in a single day. The arena air was thick with tension. The heat from the twin suns pressed down. But no one in the crowd moved or blinked. Every gaze was locked on the human and the champion. Vera stood without her spear, her breathing heavy but her eyes sharper than before. Daniel's staff rested loosely in his hand, his calm expression unchanged. This was no longer just a fight, had become a battle of pride. The queen leaned forward on her throne, the golden edges catching the sunlight. She wanted to see her warrior crush this human spirit. Instead, she was watching her champion adapt, her movements slowing in rage but sharpening in thought. Vera stepped forward, her bare hands curling into fists. The crowd roared, many calling for blood. She swung with a speed that surprised even Daniel. Her clawed knuckles sliced through the air, forcing him to block with the staff. The impact rattled through his arms, showing her strength even without a weapon. But Daniel didn't retreat. He stayed close, moving just out of reach, forcing her to twist and turn every time she struck. He answered with a quick tap from the staff, light, controlled, almost like a teacher correcting a student's stance. It was maddening for Vera. Her blows were powerful enough to crush armor, but the human always seemed one step ahead. Then she changed tactics. She lunged low, sweeping her leg toward his knees. Daniel jumped, but as he landed, she was already twisting, using her tail to whip at his side. The strike caught him off guard, slamming into his ribs. The crowd roared as Daniel staggered back. It was the first time she had truly hit him. Pain shot through his side. He tightened his grip on the staff. His eyes narrowing, Vera smirked. Sensing an opening, she came in hard, her fists a blur, each strike pushing him toward the arena wall. Daniel blocked, dodged, and absorbed blows. But the pressure was building. His boots scraped against the stone. Another punch, another tail strike. The wall was at his back now. From the royal balcony, the queen smiled, thinking the fight was shifting in her favor. But then it happened. Vera swung high. Aiming for his head, Daniel ducked low, sweeping the bottom of his staff against her leg. She stumbled, her balance breaking for a fraction of a second. That was all he needed. He stepped forward, slamming the staff's end into her shoulder, forcing her back. Vera growled, but Daniel didn't stop. For the first time, he attacked not wildly, but with a series of sharp, precise strikes, one to the ribs, one to the thigh, one to the side of her neck. Each hit made her flinch. Each step forced her further from the wall. The crowd's roar shifted. Now there were cheers for the human, the underdog, the unexpected. Warrior Vera's pride burned. She had never been driven back like this. Never by someone smaller, weaker, and from a race most here considered soft. Daniel spun the staff once more, his breathing calm again. "Still want to humiliate me?" he asked quietly, the words for her ears alone. Vera's jaw tightened. She charged again. But her strikes were less certain now. Daniel's movements became faster, his footwork cleaner. It was as if he had been holding back, waiting for the right moment to show his true skill. Then came the move that stunned them all. Vera leaped high, aiming to crash down on him with all her weight. Daniel stepped into her landing path, twisting his body and using the staff to redirect her momentum. She hit the sand hard, rolling once before springing back to her feet, but her eyes were wide. She knew now, beyond doubt, that this human could beat her. The queen's expression darkened. This was not the humiliation she had planned. If anything, it was turning into the opposite, a display that could inspire whispers of human strength. Among the people that could not be allowed, Vera took a step back, her chest rising and falling. Daniel stood ready, the staff steady in his grip. Both knew the fight was reaching its most dangerous point. One mistake now would decide the victor. And for the first time, the great champion felt a flicker of uncertainty in her heart. The arena. Floor was a map of chaos. Sand was torn by heavy footsteps. And the air shimmered with heat from the twin suns. Vera's muscles were tense. Her tail coiled like a whip, ready to strike. Daniel's grip on the staff was steady, his chest rising and falling in controlled breaths. Both fighters knew they had reached the point where one mistake could end everything. The crowd's noise faded into a deep hum in Daniel's mind. He didn't hear the insults, the cheers, or the queen's impatient shifting on her throne. All he saw was Vera stance way her weight was balanced. The faint twitch in her shoulders, the tightening of her jaw. He knew she would strike first, and when she did, it would be everything she had left. Vera's feet kicked up sand as she lunged. Her claws came fast toward his neck, but Daniel twisted away. Her tail followed instantly, whipping for his ribs. Daniel dropped low, rolling under it, and in the same motion swept his staff against her ankles. The force made her stumble, but she caught herself before hitting the ground. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The queen leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Vera growled. Her pride burning hotter than the suns overhead, she came again. This time feinting left before spinning into a powerful backhand strike. Daniel blocked. With the staff, the impact sending a sharp vibration through his arms. Before she could recover, he stepped in close. The end of his staff tapping her chest not hard enough to harm, but just enough to push her backward. The tap was an insult. The crowd felt it. And so did Vera. With a roar, she charged again, but this time Daniel didn't dodge, he planted. His feet angled his staff and met her full force. The sound of the clash rang like a drumbeat, echoing off the arena walls. The impact jolted through both fighters, but Daniel held his ground. Vera's eyes widened in that instant of surprise. Daniel moved. He spun the staff in a tight arc, striking her shoulder, then her leg. Then hooking behind her knee, her balance broke completely, and she dropped to one knee. Daniel's staff came to rest against her throat knot, pressing, not threatening, but firm enough to show there was no escape. The arena froze, no one cheered, no one jeered. The silence was so deep that even the hot wind moving across the sand could be heard. Vera's chest rose and fell quickly, her breath ragged. She looked up at Daniel, expecting a victorious grin, maybe a cruel remark. Instead, she saw calm eyes and no sign of mockery. Daniel stepped back, lowering his staff he didn't take. In vantage of her vulnerable position, instead, he gave her space to stand. That axe multisum was massive in the warrior's code. It was mercy, and mercy in the arena was rare. Vera rose slowly, her gaze never leaving his. The queen's voice broke the silence. "By the law of the crown," she said, her tone sharp but controlled. "The match is decided." Gasps spread through the audience as the meaning sank in. The human had won, not by luck, but by skill. And in a way that humiliated no one but the queen herself. Daniel turned toward the royal balcony. He bowed slightly, not as a servant, but as an equal. The gesture was bold, maybe even dangerous. The queen's lips curled into something between a smile and a threat. She could not deny the victory, not in front of the entire city, and yet, she already began to think of how to twist this outcome to her advantage. Vera stood beside Daniel now. Still breathing hard, she said nothing, but the look in her eyes was no longer pure anger. It was something mixed: confusion, respect, and a question she wasn't ready to voice. The crowd erupted at last, the noise deafening. Some cheered for the champion who had fought bravely. Others for the human who had defied all expectations. Above them, the queen raised her hand for quiet. Her voice carried across the arena like a blade cutting through the noise. As tradition demands, she declared, "The victor shall claim the ancient prize." Her words made the arena fall silent again. And though many didn't yet know what she meant, Daniel saw Vera's eyes widen. The true consequence of his victory was about to be revealed. The crowd leaned forward, hanging on the queen's every word. Her voice echoed over the arena, calm but sharp enough to cut through the roaring heat. As tradition demands, she said, "The victor of a public challenge shall receive not only honor, but the life bond of the warrior they have defeated." The words struck the air like a hammer. The audience gasped, some in shock, others in wild excitement. Whispers spread like fire. Some aliens muttered about ancient laws they thought were no longer enforced. Others grinned, eager to see what the human would do with such a prize. Vera's eyes widened, her breath caught. For a moment before her jaw tightened, she had fought hundreds of battles, defeated countless challengers. Never once had she considered losing. And never once had she imagined being bound by this law. And now, before the eyes of thousands, she was being told that she belonged to the man who had bested her. Daniel stood still, the blunt staff still in his hand. His brow furrowed slightly, not in confusion, but in thought. He had heard about alien customs before. But this was not what he had come here for. His plan had been to survive the fight and prove himself. He hadn't expected to be given a living, breathing person as a prize. From the balcony, the queen's lips curved into a smile that was both amused and cruel. She leaned forward, her crown glinting in the sunlight. "I trust, human, that you accept this gift," she asked, her voice sweet but carrying the weight of command. Her words were a trap. If Daniel refused, it would be seen as an insult to the queen's culture. If he accepted, he would be tangled in her game, bound to a warrior who might hate him. Under the watchful eye of the crown, the crowd began chanting Vera's name. Then Daniel's. The sound clashed in the hot air. Vera's face was unreadable now, but her eyes burned with a mix of anger and something else, something she herself didn't want to admit. She hated the idea of being given away, but the law was the law, and breaking it would bring shame upon her name and her family. Daniel finally moved, stepping forward until he stood just a few paces from the queen's balcony. He raised his head, meeting her gaze without fear. "I fought to prove myself, not to own anyone," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the arena. Gasps ran through the crowd. The queen's smile did not fade, but a flicker of irritation passed through her eyes. "Then you will treat her as your equal," she replied smoothly. "But the bond will stand by our ancient law. She is yours, and you are hers." The crowd roared again. Some cheered the queen's cleverness. Others whispered that the human had been trapped. Daniel's eyes shifted to Vera. She met his gaze, her shoulders tense, as if bracing for mockery or dominance. But instead, he simply gave a small nod, neither victory nor pity, just acknowledgement. It was the last reaction she expected. And for a heartbeat, her guard cracked. Guards stepped forward, not to force her toward him, but to present her formally. Vera walked with her head high, her pride unbroken despite the humiliation. When she reached Daniel, the guard announced in a loud voice, "By decree of the queen and the law of the crown, these two are now bound as life partners, in honor and in duty." The moment was heavy. Daniel could feel the weight of thousands of eyes on them. Vera's hand was offered by tradition. He was meant to clasp it and declare his claim instead. He took her hand gently and bowed his head slightly. The crowd murmured, surprised at the gesture. It was not the act of a conqueror, but of someone who understood the meaning of respect. The queen watched them with narrowed eyes. She had planned for this to be a chain around the human's neck, but already she sensed this might become something else, something she couldn't easily control. Daniel had not broken her law, but he had twisted its meaning into something entirely his own as the arena gates opened and the two were led out together. The noise of the crowd followed them like a wave. Vera walked beside Daniel in silence. She had been defeated, bound by law, and given away like a prize yet. For reasons she didn't understand, she did not feel entirely dishonored. There was something in the way he carried himself, in the way he had spared her in the arena. It made her wonder, was this truly a trap, or the start of something neither of them had planned? The streets outside the grand arena were alive with noise. Merchants shouted from their stalls. Street performers danced. And the distant roar of the crowd still echoed from the victory that had shocked the city. Daniel walked beside Vera, the queen's guards a short distance behind to make sure the bonded pair reached their quarters. The air between them was heavy. They had not spoken a single word since leaving the arena. Vera's strides were long and confident, her head held high. She refused to look at him. Every step reminded her of the humiliation she had suffered. In her mind, she replayed the fight teach dodge. Each strike, the way he had spared her when she was down, it made her feel strange. Anger burned inside her. But so did an uncomfortable flicker of respect. Daniel noticed her silence, but didn't force conversation. He had learned long ago that warriors like her did not respond well to unnecessary words. Instead, he kept his pace steady, scanning the busy streets, his ribs still ached from her tail strike earlier, but he ignored the pain. He knew this bond the queen had forced upon them was meant to be a chain around both their necks. But he wasn't planning to let her win that game. They reached a tall stone building at the edge of the market district. Inside, it was quieter, the noise of the streets fading to a distant hum. The guards handed Daniel a carved wooden token. The queen's sealand left without a word. When the door shut, Vera finally turned to face him. "I do not belong to you," she said sharply, her voice like steel. Daniel met her gaze calmly. "I never said you did," he replied. Her eyes narrowed, as if she had expected him to boast or taunt her. The lack of arrogance confused her more than she wanted to admit. They settled into opposite corners of the room. The space was simple: 2 beds, a table, and a small window that looked out over the rooftops. The silence stretched until it became almost unbearable. Finally, Vera spoke again. "You fight differently than my kind," she said, not as a compliment, but as an observation. Daniel shrugged. "We fight to survive, not to show off," she frowned. "To survive?" she asked. He leaned back in his chair. "Where I'm from, we don't have champions or royal games. We have wars, and in wars, you win by staying alive." Her expression shifted slightly. It was hard for her to imagine fighting without an audience, without glory. Yet his words carried weight that night. They shared a meal in silence. Daniel noticed she was watching him from the corner of her eye, not with hostility this time, but with curiosity. It wasn't the gaze of someone planning revenge, it was the gaze of someone trying to understand. The next morning, they were summoned by the queen's messenger. A small skirmish had broken out near the city gates. Raiders from a rival territory were testing the border. By tradition, bonded pairs were required to serve together in defense of the capital. Vera armed herself quickly, strapping her spear to her back. Daniel took a shorter staff this time, but his movements were calm, deliberate. She noticed that. And though she said nothing, she respected it. When they reached the gates, Chaos was everywhere. Shouts, the clash of metal, the smell of smoke. In the air, without hesitation, Vera charged into the fight. Daniel was right behind her. Their movements strangely in sync despite their lack of training together. She would strike hard and heavy, breaking through the enemy's line. Daniel would follow up with precision, taking down anyone who tried to flank her in the heat of the battle. Vera caught herself glancing at him more than once. He fought without fear, without hesitation, and without the arrogance she had expected. At one point, an enemy soldier tried to ambush her from behind. Before she could turn, Daniel was there, his staff smashing the attacker to the ground. She met his eyes for just a second. There was no smirk. "Number you owe me," just a quick nod before he moved on to the next threat. When the fight was over and the raiders fled, they stood side by side, both breathing hard. Neither spoke about what had just happened, but something had shifted in. The space between them, hatred, was still there. But it had been joined by something else, something far more dangerous: mutual respect. From a distant balcony in the palace, the queen watched them return. Her eyes narrowed. This was not the outcome she wanted. She had hoped for friction, conflict, maybe even betrayal. But instead, she saw a dangerous possibility: forming two warriors from different worlds, slowly beginning to fight as one. The queen's palace glowed under the twin moons. Its towers rose like silver spears against the night sky. Inside, the grand hall was silent, except for the faint rustle of guards shifting their armor. The queen sat on her throne, her face calm, but her eyes burning with a hidden plan. Daniel and Vera stood before her, side by side. They had been summoned without explanation. The last time they stood here together, the queen had bound them by law. Tonight, the air carried a different kind of wet sense that something dangerous was about to unfold. "I have a mission for you," the queen said, her voice smooth, her words flowed like honey. But her tone was sharp enough to cut a delegation. "From the rival kingdom will arrive at the northern outpost tomorrow night. You will escort them here safely." She leaned forward slightly, but be warned. Not all will wish for them to arrive alive. Daniel nodded slowly. Vera's expression stayed unreadable. They both knew this was more than just a mission. This was a test. The queen was giving them a task where trust would mean the difference between life and death, and perhaps, she hoped, they would fail. The journey to the northern outpost took most of the next day. The path wound through narrow canyons where shadows moved like predators. Vera led the way, her spear ready. Daniel followed close, scanning the cliffs for movement. They didn't talk much, but the silence between them was no longer heavy with hostility, was focused. Like the quiet before a storm, as the sun dipped below the jagged horizon, they reached the outpost. The delegation was waiting: 3 diplomats and a small escort. They looked uneasy, and for good reason. The northern border was crawling with mercenaries loyal to no one but gold. The journey back began under moonlight. At first, all was calm, but halfway through the canyon pass, shadows stirred. Figures moved along the ridge above, the metallic glint of weapons catching the moonlight. "Ambush," Daniel said quietly. Vera didn't hesitate. "Stay behind me," she ordered the diplomats, planting herself between them and the threat. The first wave came fast, raining down. From above, Daniel knocked to his side with his staff while Vera spun her spear. Deflecting the rest, mercenaries dropped from the cliffs, weapons drawn. The narrow pass became a storm of movement, steel against steel, shouts and grunts echoing off the stone walls. Daniel moved like water, weaving through the attackers, his staff striking with precision. Vera was a wall of force, her spear sweeping wide, cutting down any who dared come close to the diplomats. One mercenary slipped past, rushing straight for the smallest diplomat. Before Daniel could move, Vera was there, her spear slamming into the ground between the attacker and their target. She grabbed the mercenary by the collar and threw him against the canyon wall with bone-rattling force. For a moment, their eyes met in the chaos. No words passed between them. But something unspoken was clear. They were no longer fighting for survival alone. They were fighting for each other. The last mercenary fell, and the canyon grew silent except for the sound of heavy breathing. Daniel wiped the sweat from his brow. Vera leaned on her spear, her chest rising and falling. The diplomats were unharmed. Though shaken, the rest of the journey was uneventful. When they finally stepped into the palace courtyard, the queen was waiting. Her sharp gaze swept over them, searching for any sign of failure. Instead, she saw two warriors standing side by side, alive, unbroken, and most dangerously united. "You have done your duty," the queen said slowly. Daniel gave a small bow. Vera simply met her gaze, unflinching. The queen's lips curved into a thin smile, but in her eyes, there was something else, a recognition that her plan had failed. That night, Daniel and Vera stood on the palace balcony, the city lights stretching far below. "You could have let me fall today," Daniel said quietly. Vera glanced at him. "And you could have let me fall in the arena." For a moment, they just stood there in silence. The cool night wind brushing past them. Finally, Vera spoke again. Her voice softer than he had ever heard. "You are not my enemy. Human." Daniel smiled faintly. "And you are not mine." It wasn't a declaration of friendship, nor was it a confession of anything deeper. It was simply the truth. From the night of the challenge to this moment, under the moonlight, they had walked from rivalry into something far stronger: loyalty. And in a world where trust was rare, that loyalty was worth more than any crown.